I can hear a couple of people in the background. Kelly has us unmuted so that we're able to communicate. And as you can see, he will mute and unmute us relevant to how much background noise that there is. So just a quick introduction. My name is Kevin King. I'll be the moderator. And on the tab that you see, there's a chat box that you can send information to us. So that as Kelly's speaking, if you want to type a message or if you have a question, you can go ahead and put information in there. We're due to start promptly at it's 2 o'clock by my clock, and Kelly will be joining us any second here. In that chat box, you could type in a quick message. You can also include the city and state or province and city that you're connecting to us from and your hourly labor rate if you're a shop, so that Kelly could use that information as a real-world experience, not so the examples apply directly to our audience. So with that, we're going to introduce Kelly Bennett. And Kelly, just a reminder, you're going to record this session.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Kevin. Yes, the session is being recorded. Great to see so many people online. This is the second highest webinar we've had. And we have Alan Jansen on the call. Alan Jansen is the editor for Cars Magazine up in Canada. Know him well. Saw him at an event, I think it was 2005, something like that, maybe 04, in Las Vegas, and he asked me if I'd write for the magazine, which I did for 8 years. I sent you a couple of articles, actually, that I've written over the years. The first one was called Remembering My Best Mentor Ever, and that was edited by the amazing Alan Jansen. I have huge respect for Alan, does great work, been in the industry a really long time. And that was an article about Bob and the impact he had on my life. And also I sent you an article that I'd written on selling parts. So we're going to jump right into it. Kevin's the co-moderator, and I'm going to be having him talk a little bit later on. He's going to introduce some of the financial aspects for us. Just a little bit of a history. I started my business in Calgary in 1987. I wrote a workshop called Starting a Successful Business, which I wrote and traveled across Canada eventually to 150 cities teaching that. I received a phone call from the University College of the Fraser Valley in British Columbia, Canada, and they asked me if I could do some training for the automotive industry, which I'll date myself even further. I was a service advisor in Calgary in 1978, 79, and 80. It was a Texaco gas station, so for us Canadians, I'm dating myself there. We don't have Texaco anymore in Canada, and gas, I remember, was 16.7 cents a liter, so multiply that by 4, and you'll see what it was in Canadian or in US. And so things have changed a lot. And so I did that session, and now that's all I do is automotive. Bob O'Connor, the person that you see in front of you, was one of the trainers. It was an 80-hour session in those days, and it was designed to help automotive repair shops become more successful with what they did. And one thing I really appreciate about Bob O'Connor, he was from Seattle, and he was, to the best of my knowledge, the first person to bring automotive management training to the independent sector. Bob had run shops on his owned shops, worked in dealership environments, and he brought to independents some desperately needed management training and stuff that he'd learned in the dealerships. The dealerships really were good at the training part, independents not so much, but he brought two things. He brought management training, and he also brought management groups. Bob and I went on a trip to Atlanta on his 55th birthday, and so I just turned 55, and I remember Bob well in this trip that we had, and we were talking about in Atlanta on that, he called it his double nickel. 55, we went out for dinner, and we talked about implementation. And if you've been in one of my training sessions, you know that I've said many times that training does not increase the success of your business. Implementation of the training does. And now with my 30th year in the business as a trainer, I look back and I see some people who've done insanely well with their businesses, and some people not so much. There's one particular fellow in Ontario who's taken more training from me than almost anybody else, and I would see that he would come back to classes and come back to classes, and I saw that the biggest problem was implementation. And now I'm doing some one-on-one coaching with him. He's in our management group, and we're starting to see some implementation. You know how it can go with training. You go off to a class, maybe a one-day class, or some of the classes we've taught are 5 days, and you go to a class and you get all excited and motivated and you're going to go back and change the entire world, and then you get back to your shop and life happens. The average manager, just for the record, is interrupted 232 times a day. So how do you get stuff done when you're interrupted that much? And a quote for you is that running a repair shop is actually quite simple. All you need to do is buy some parts and install them for more than what you paid for them. That's all there is to it, really, except for a few thousand details. And it's those thousands of details that can get you bogged down. And back in the day with Bob, by the way, it was an 80-hour course. I was doing business plan. I also did some financial management training and marketing. And Bob was a trainer that I'd not met for a while because it was an 80-hour course spread out over 3 months, and it would be 2 nights a week. So I'd go in and do my 2 nights, and then Bob would come in, weeks later. But I did get a chance to meet Bob. He came up to Canada to do some training. He was looking for somebody who could speak Canadian, which, by the way, the difference between Americans and Canadians, we say "a" and they say "huh." That's pretty much the difference between the two. I worked in the U.S. for 15 years, and I can tell you there's a lot of Americans online that I know what the American dream is. The American dream is to work hard to buy toys that you just don't have time for because you're so busy working to pay for them. Anyway, and I just lost my train of thought there, which I do sometimes. But anyway, I never got a chance to meet Bob at the time, but he came to Calgary, and I sat in a technician time management class with him for 2 days, and then we started traveling together, and he would tell you that he handpicked me as a trainer. I was really impressed with that. He dubbed me the enter trainer. If you've been in classes, you don't get bored for sure. And one of my favorite things is whether it's a day or 3 days or 5 days, people say the time just flies by. And another thing that really was instrumental with Bob is he ran a management group up here in Canada. It was in Vancouver, British Columbia, and it just so happened that the day that I took over, I think it was 1996, and it was my birthday then as well. So birthdays and turning 55 have a lot to do with Bob O'Connor. Just a couple things. I have a friend of mine who is looking for a job as an automotive technician. He's really good with what he does. He just is unemployed right now. Just to give you a quick picture from his last employer. Somebody sent me this week. The new guy may not have quite the experience that he says he has. I think that's the worst I've ever seen a technician do. Now you can tell this isn't a doctored up picture. He's at least 3 or 4 inches off the ground. My son was a service advisor in Canada for quite a number of years, and I sent this to him last week, and he said, could you imagine how they would try to explain that to the customer? Anyway, introduction to what we're going to get into today and why I chose this topic of the 2 things that it takes. Recently in British Columbia, Canada, I was asked by Workers' Compensation to train an employee who'd been injured at work. His name's Terry, and Terry was a great technician, worked at a shop for, I think it was 30 years. And one day he got injured at work, which does happen, and he messed up his shoulder so severely that he couldn't be a technician anymore. So actually he contacted me and said, could you train me to be a manager? Alan, he'd read the articles that we'd written over the years, and he knew me well from that, and he wanted to, excuse me, I got a bit of a cold. He wanted to get retrained, and so I did that. I did some on-site training with him and live training, and I introduced him to all the webinars that I had, and it was very fortunate. He actually ended up getting hired at one of the shops and is now a manager. But what was interesting about that is 2 of the days was in classroom training. It was one-on-one. I just had him, and I had arranged with a colleague of mine to go out to a shop and do some on-site training. And so he recommended a shop which we went to, and we were planning to spend the entire day there. And as I watched things unfold, I thought, well, the shop isn't really doing well. I saw their financials, and it was sad because it was a father who'd started the business, and he got super busy doing some other things, and he hired his son and didn't really provide him with much training. And I was watching how they were doing things. I would see him estimate jobs, and he was using list price for parts. Their parts gross profit, it seems to me, was about 32%, which is horrific. Their tire gross profit was less than 18, not quite 18%. I said, you really need to get 30% on tires, and he said no, it was far too competitive and wasn't able to do that. So we were walking around the shop, and it was okay, a little bit disorganized, but I thought this is not what I wanted him to see. And so I had contacted some people that I'd known way back from 1996 in that management group, and I had contacted them and said, tomorrow I'd like if we could come and do a tour of your shop. And it seems to me we went to 5 shops that day. And what a difference. We went into one shop, a guy named Scott, one of the smartest operators that I know. Alan Jensen, you're online, you know who I'm talking about. I won't use his last name, but he is a brilliant shop owner. And one thing you should know about me, and Kevin, you know it well, is I don't exaggerate. I'm not one of the people that will say always and never and everybody and make up amounts. But this one shop, Scott, he contacted me last July, after July actually, and he did his best month ever, $53,000 a month per technician in sales. Now, I know enough to know from the numbers that that's not exactly totally possible. I mean, it can be done. He obviously, because he did it, but I'm thinking there was obviously some work in progress that he had from the month before, but he consistently does about $45,000 to $48,000 a month in sales. Just amazing. When he did that $53,000, by the way, he rewarded his entire staff by sending them down, paid for a trip down to Las Vegas to go to the SEMA show. If you've never been to SEMA, I would recommend that at some point in your career you certainly make it down there. And he sent his staff, which was phenomenal to shut down his shop for that amount of time. And of course, if you make 53 grand a month per technician in gross sales, you're able to do that. And so we were at his shop, and beautiful place. We're sitting up in his little boardroom, and I noticed on the whiteboard was written productivity for the day, previous day, efficiency, proficiency, and month to date. And that was stuff that he'd learned from Bob O'Connor way back in probably about 1994, 95, somewhere in there. And I was really impressed that he was on those numbers. And Bob and I had talked many times about how that the money that is made in this industry is all about, well, not all about, but primarily about labor. The average independent repair shop is not great at selling labor. The average independent repair shop only sells about 4 to 5 hours in a day. And I've seen that hold true. I work with shops, I see their financial data. Yes, of course, some do 7 and 8 and 9, and one shop I know that consistently does 11 hours a day and has for years per tech, but the average shop is 4 to 5. And the issue, with a challenge with a webinar like this is there's some people that are hearing me for the very first ever time. There's other people who've taken a huge amount of training, and then there's people that are in the management group that I have. And so I have to teach it like you've not heard this before, because it just works better that way. So the average independent repair shop selling 4 to 5 hours a day. And the analogy that I like to give is, could you imagine if it was spark plugs? And in the morning, you are at your shop, and at 8 o'clock in the morning, your part vendor comes and drops off 8 spark plugs, and you see all 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you know that day 4 of them were installed in a customer's vehicle, and at the end of the day, the other 4 are missing. You never do find out where they went. And the next day it's tires. You buy 8 tires, and you see them in the morning. They're dropped off at 8 o'clock in the morning, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you know that day 4 of those were installed in a customer's vehicle. But the other 4 that you saw there in the morning are just gone. They're completely gone. You never do find them. How long would it take the average owner to freak out to find out where these plugs or tires are going? Day 1 or day 2? Well, obviously it would be day 1. But most shops at 8 o'clock in the morning, your labor inventory arrives at the shop, hopefully a little bit early to get ready for the day, but you have inventory of hours. And I will ask people in training, how much do you have in parts inventory at your shop? And years ago, of course, it was much higher than today with just-in-time delivery. Of course, it depends on the proximity that you have to a parts store, but most people have a good idea of what they have in part inventory or tire inventory. And then I'd ask, what do you have in labor inventory? And a lot of people would not know that because they didn't track it. And the idea is, what if you sold all the labor inventory that you had? You bought 8 hours in a day. Excuse me, even if you are paying flat rate and you're not paying for 8 hours in a day, you're paying for what you sell, you still have 8 hours of inventory, and the idea is to sell that. Another fellow that I want to mention is a fellow in Toronto. His name is Rex, and Rex took training from me. I remember it like it was yesterday, but it was 20 years ago in November, and I've been training his son for about 7 or 8 years now, maybe longer. And I'm starting to feel old when people say, my dad took your training back in the 90s. One day it'll be grandfather, I guess. But Rex, I remember being at the class. He was smart guy, brilliant technician, but lacked management skills. And he made that clear. He didn't know the difference between markup and gross profit. He wasn't familiar with labor inventory. And he started to make some significant changes. And I had a conversation with Rex. Again, it's neat to see people 20 years later still doing the stuff that works, right? It's not stuff that we talk about that doesn't work. It works. And he said, Kelly, when I figured out the labor, when I figured out how to sell the labor and selling that 8 hours in a day, he said the rest takes care of itself. When you sell labor, labor sells everything else. Labor sells parts, parts don't sell labor. And when you sell labor, you're selling parts and sublet and tires and towing and shop supplies and environmental fees. And of course, labor should be the highest thing that you sell. You should see more money from labor than anything else. I ran management groups in Canada for quite some time. I also ran some management groups down in the United States. And I see the financial statements for many shops. And particularly in Canada, I can tell you that when people joined our management groups and we saw their financial data, I know the number well because it was 100%. 100% of the people that were in that group initially saw more money from parts than labor. And I want to encourage you, if you've not looked at this, to take a look at your financials, pay attention to the labor sales and the part sales. Your labor sales should drastically exceed your part sales. And yet 100% of the people came. The worst I saw was a shop in Ontario that was doing $2.47 in parts for every dollar in labor. If you came up to me in a class, and I've had it happen many times over the years where people will show me their financial statements. And if I looked at your financials that I've never seen before, the first thing that I want to see is I want to see your labor sales versus your part sales. Where is the most of the money coming from? Why should you see more money from labor than parts? Well, the question to ask yourself is, how often do you sell parts over the counter without any labor? When's the last time you sold a part over the counter? Some people have never done it, some people once in a while. One of my clients, by the way, I think probably my favorite name for a repair shop is a fellow up here in Canada, and he only works on Volkswagens, and the name of his shop is the Old Volks Home. And I just love the Old Volks Home. What a great name. Anyway, I got a text from him early this morning, and he said, you know what? He said, my parts GP is low. He said, but one thing that I never really thought about, he said, I do sell parts over the counter, and I do sell parts over the internet, and he ships parts across North America, actually. Hard to get parts that he can find for people. Well, that needs to be separated out. So anytime you're selling a part over the counter, you need to separate that out so you can see the gross profit on those parts and the gross profit on the parts internally. Just for the record, a couple of other things that can throw this number off. In other words, sometimes you can't identify what a problem is, and you need to be able to identify the problem. And if you can't see the problem, then you don't know how to fix it, or you don't even know it needs to be fixed. But whenever you buy parts for your own personal vehicle, when you buy parts for your shop vehicles, let's say somebody on this line I know has 7 loaner cars, well, that's a lot of parts to be putting into those. Those need to be separated out. When employees are buying parts through your business, whether you sell them at cost or cost plus 10, those need to be separated out. One of the people that just joined their group, I was looking at the financials, and their tires are part of their parts. And that's another thing that you need to make sure is separated out, is to separate out the parts from the tires. And by the way, I just want to make this clear. The two things that are different in shops that do extremely well and not, two things. One is the people that do extremely well are on their numbers. They know their numbers inside and out. And secondly, they're in management groups. And I want to go back to the story I was telling you about with the fellow in BC, Terry. And so we were at Scott's shop, and then from there we went to another shop, extremely well-run shop, and he too was in the management group back in the 90s. And by the way, these people are still in management groups. They run a group in British Columbia. It's the longest running independent group I've ever seen. They do well. And we went to that shop, and his numbers are phenomenal. Not quite as good as Scott's, but very, very good. And I'm sitting in the boardroom with Terry, the guy I'm training, and I look, and here's a whiteboard that says productivity, efficiency, and proficiency. Nothing impacts your profitability more so than those three things: productivity, efficiency, proficiency. But I'll tell you without exaggeration that over 90%, sadly, over 90% of independent repair shops do not track those things. Dealerships track that. In most cases, almost every dealership daily will track productivity, efficiency, and proficiency. And the other thing that they normally track daily is effective labor rate. And I'm going to show you a spreadsheet that some of you online have seen before called the Power of Team, where I compare 3 different shops. One is awesome and the other one's not so great. And the biggest difference between them is the productivity and the efficiency. So from that shop, Terry and I went to another shop that does extremely well. Beautiful, beautiful facility. They had just moved into this new huge facility. They bought the building, and I was impressed with how big it was. I don't know how many square feet, but it was huge. And we're sitting there in the office, and I look up, and here's a whiteboard that says productivity, efficiency, and proficiency. That first shop that we were at that had really low gross profit was selling, and I don't exaggerate, 3 to 4 hours a day per technician. The car count was not great. They weren't great at making every car count, and they were not aware of productivity and efficiency. But these other shops were. And I won't belabor the story, but we went to 5 shops. And by the way, the last shop that we went to, a fellow named Peter turned it over to his son, and he does extremely well as well. And again, on the whiteboard is productivity, efficiency, and proficiency. The one thing that was clear between these amazing shops that do extremely well is they were tracking productivity, efficiency, proficiency, and they were absolutely on their numbers. And they all have a spreadsheet that they use, and I'm going to be introducing that to you today. And then, so back to Rex in Toronto, again, he realized that once you figure out what's happening with your labor and you stop the labor leak, you're able to make a huge difference, a huge impact in your business. And we're talking about people that learned this back in the 90s that still today are doing those things. So to reiterate, I've come to the conclusion there's 2 things that it takes to run a highly successful repair shop. One, you need to have an in-depth understanding of your financials. I recall doing a session, I think it was Baltimore, and we were talking about financial management, and I was asking people, what's your parts gross profit overall? And there's an older gentleman sitting in the front row, I remember like it was yesterday, and he said, well, we're not really tracking that yet. And yet he'd been in the business almost 30 years, and he still wasn't tracking productivity and efficiency. Alan Jansen, you've sat in many of my classes over the years, some of the other people online, and you've seen me do this. I say you buy a part for this much, you mark it up for a desired gross profit, and you sell it. How much do you sell it for? And I expect 2 answers for sure, but oftentimes there's far more than that. Some of you have seen where we might have 30 people in the class. I remember one time, Raleigh, North Carolina, we had 22 answers to the same question. We're not talking about intelligence here. We're talking about understanding the difference between markup and gross profit. If you were to show me a blueprint, or sorry, a wiring diagram, sorry, same thing, and ask me to read it, I would be completely clueless. I was working with a technician, brilliant technician recently. We did a session called Selling Diagnostics and Doing Diagnostics. And on day 1, I taught how to sell diagnostics and the entire day and how to fix that problem of charging correctly for diagnostics. And on day 2, he was teaching how to do diagnostics. And so I was hosting it. So of course I taught all day 1, and then I sat through the class on day 2. And I'm looking at these wiring diagrams, and he's telling all this stuff. Somebody asked him a question, and he went on and on and on with this answer, and I said that's exactly what I would have said. I don't read wiring diagrams, that's not what I do, but I do know how to read financial statements. It doesn't make me stupid because I don't know how to read wiring diagrams, and it doesn't make somebody stupid because they don't know how to read financials. It's a matter of ignorance. We don't know. Stupidity is, you know, somebody's told you 52 times and taken out paper and crayons and trying to explain that. Most people are not there. They're really brilliant technicians, and that's what I've seen a lot of over the years, is absolutely brilliant technicians. I'm going to show you some actual financial data for a fellow who's a one-man shop, and I decided in preparing for this, I wanted to do it differently than I did at March 21. I'm going to show you a shop that has a one-man shop, and I'm going to show you a shop that has 7 technicians. And I want to tell you that when it comes to your financials, it's more about percentages than it is about dollars. You manage your business by percentage. Dollars is what we send to the bank electronically or bring to the bank, but it's about percentages. In a management group, it doesn't matter if somebody has 7 technicians, somebody has 2, somebody has 3, somebody's in California with a labor rate of $140 an hour, somebody's in Atlantic, Canada at 58. I still see some of that. some people close to $100 an hour. And it doesn't matter what your labor rate is. The material that we teach, the benchmarks that Bob O'Connor taught me, and I've adapted some of those and changed some of those as things have changed in our industry, but it's about percentages. When we are looking at a financial composite of all these shops combined, I'm going to show you that a little later on, it's not about the dollars. Just because somebody's got huge dollars because they've got more technicians, it's all about percentages. The material that Bob taught me, the material that I've taken and adopted as well, is it doesn't matter. And I've trained all across Canada many times. I'm very fortunate as a Canadian. I have been to all 50 states. I don't exaggerate that, all 50. It doesn't matter if it's Atlanta, California, the Midwest, Vancouver Island, Newfoundland. The materials are the same. The percentages are the same. Yes, in some places people are paying their technicians $40 an hour. Some are paying 18, some are paying 25, and the labor rate relates to that. You go to places like San Francisco and the rent is astronomical. I was looking at somebody's rent yesterday in a coaching session I was doing, and I thought, oh my goodness gracious, that's such low rent. But it's not about that. It's about percentages. It's about what are your sales per month per technician? What percentage of your sales is going to rent? What percentage of your sales is going to pay for your technicians? What percentage of your sales are going to pay your service advisors? Another thing I just want to mention, Kevin King is on the line, and Kevin I've been working with for a couple of years, and he's now teamed up with me. We're running management groups together. He's on pretty much every webinar that I do. He brings experience to the industry that I don't have. And we were doing a session together in Ontario, Canada in January of this past year. And Kevin, you were there. I kind of lost my patience. And for those of you that have seen me in training, I'm pretty patient with people's questions. It's kind of funny. People will, oh, I'm going to trip up the instructor and I'm going to ask a question. One of my favorites is a fellow said, Kelly, you're like Machine Gun Kelly. People ask a question and you're ready for it and you go boom, 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 and answer the question and, you know, kind of shoot holes in the stuff. But we're in this session in Ontario and a fellow really got to annoying me, and he was talking about parts and parts gross profit. And there are people in our industry that, and actually let me quickly show you, yeah, I'm going to cover this. I'm going to come back to that story. I think that your whole financial management is like a GPS system. Your GPS has three purposes. And by the way, just to be clear, this session is being recorded. You are going to be getting a copy of this. You can watch it online. I'm going to send it to you as a link. It's technically a hidden link on YouTube, so it'll be your private link. You can share it with anybody. That's fine. And I'm also going to be sending you most of the financials that I'm going to show you, with the exception of the group composite, which wouldn't be fair to do that, but I'm going to send you all that information as well. But with the, so you can take notes later on and watch it and rewind and pause, etc. I'm also going to show you just a short little link I'm going to send you. It's a 5-minute thing on how to download YouTube videos. Some people online, you know how to do that. I personally just learned last year. Somebody taught me. And I'm going to show you how you can take a link from any YouTube, in this case these webinars, and you can download them onto your hard drive so you can watch them whenever you want. You don't have to be online. You can watch them on your tablet, you can watch them on your phone, and you can pause and rewind and come back to them, etc. The GPS really has three purposes. It shows you where you are. Now, most of us know where we are, but what's important with the GPS was somebody like me who lived on an acreage. Alan, you've been to the acreage that I had there in Cochrane, and it's a small town. It was like 6,000 people when I moved there, and it was a pretty simple little town. And the next thing you know, I'm in Chicago and Atlanta and Baltimore and LA and San Francisco, and been to every major US city. And GPS is helpful. Didn't have it when I first started. I wish they did, but GPS lets you know where you are. And it's interesting for me to see where a lot of people unfortunately don't know where they are. They may be brilliant at fixing cars, great at diagnosing cars, etc., but not so great at understanding the key performance indicators that I'm going to introduce many of those to you today. So GPS shows you where you are. And so back to this class in Ontario, and we're talking about there's three ways that you can make more money in business. You're going to see it on the slide here shortly, but you can do three things. You can increase your sales, you can increase your gross profit, and you can reduce expenses. And the conversation started to get into that session about reducing expenses. And I can tell you, and I've thought this through, I don't know a shop that was able to do significant improvements by simply reducing expenses. I've been in a lot of shops, and I've seen very few shops that were in over their heads. In other words, they were in a facility much bigger than they should have. They'd bought a bunch of equipment that they shouldn't have. Most people are pretty good expense managers, and some of the things that I've seen where people try to save money. One guy was making his own windshield washer fluid. I mean, I don't have an issue with that, but you're not going to significantly make improvements by the fact that you made your own windshield washer fluid. You didn't have to purchase that. Big thing, of course, was to take paper and put it into your fax machine backwards. Some people did that with their printers. One of my favorites was a fellow in a repair shop who got his invoice from the part vendor, and he's looking at the invoice and there was something printed on the back, and it was the actual income statement from the part company that he bought the part from. And he said, I'm looking at this guy's income statement thinking he's saving money on paper by printing on the back. And I've done it. I mean, it's good for the environment, right? But you print it on the back and then you're looking at it and think, did I want this side or that side? And you're trying to figure it out, and it eats up some time. But so he calls his part vendor and says, so things aren't going so great over there. He said, your GP on parts isn't so great. He said, we do a lot better on GP on parts, and you can as a repair shop. You can get 50% GP on parts. Part stores aren't going to do that. And he said, what are you talking about? He said, well, on the back of my invoice is your income statement. He said, oh, I hate when that happens. And I've thought it through. I mean, if you put paper back in your fax machine backwards, and we don't use fax much anymore, but printers, good for the environment. But if you're really good at expense management and you're using paper twice, if you do a really good job, I mean, you're pretty diligent at it, I figure you could save $5, maybe $7 a year. Expense management, I've seen people turn off the lights at lunchtime, and I don't have an issue with that. But it's when the emphasis on what can I do to save money. And Kevin, you were talking to people about GemCar. You sell GemCar software, and we're talking $170 a month. And I'm looking at some of these people thinking, where's that money going to come from? And they're trying to figure out how they're going to come up with $170 a month. And that's why I put it in the email that I sent to you. I see people focusing on the wrong thing. And there was the guy in the shop who's talking about, in that workshop, and he was talking about parts. And he said, well, what I do, he said, I check prices. I phone around and I get prices, or I go online and I see who's got a better price, and I'll buy a part from somebody who's got a better price. And that session, Kevin, right, we were in a training room of a part vendor in Ontario, Canada. I won't mention the name of the company, but he said, for example, this company here, and sometimes their parts are too expensive, and I give them a hard time about that. And I thought, sir, you're focusing on the wrong thing. We're talking today about how to do $35,000, $40,000, $45,000 a month per technician, and you're talking about how you can beat down the price on your part vendor. And another guy came to his rescue, and he was kind of ganging up on us. He said, Kelly, you don't understand today. It's click, click, click. And it's not click, click, click. I get it. I understand. You go online, you see all the part vendors, and you can do that. But in your mind, you have to mentally jig that. You need to see what that part was. And then some people look at what the list price is, and they'll buy based on who has a higher list price, which is a really silly thing to do. And so you still need to mentally jig and look, okay, that part was this, and maybe take notes, and you decide where you're going to buy it from. I know a fellow in Ontario as well that was a part vendor. He had hired me to do a huge amount of training, and he was tired about hearing people say, oh, that's too expensive from you, and the other store down the street's cheaper, and that part vendor's cheaper. And he decided to do some homework. He took 50 line items of parts from various different people, and sorry, I'm laughing because I'm thinking about how people do this with groceries, and they collect the flyers. My mother was like this. She was a coupon lady, and she would take flyers from 5 different grocery stores and go to that store because something was on. She'd say it's on there for this and it's on there for that, and she'd head off, and she's retired, so she had the time for it, but she would go to the 5 different stores to buy the stuff to save money, and it's time consuming. And then sometimes you sacrifice quality, service, and delivery, and time, and the price of gas, etc. But back to the vendor. So what he did is he took 50 line items and he compared with, I think it was 3 or 4 different vendors in his area. A small town, not a lot of competition. And he said, yeah, some things were higher here, some things were lower there. But he said the difference was minuscule. When I added up the bottom, what the parts would have cost from vendor to vendor, he said it was so close. I have had people say, you know, any part that's over $50, we make 3 phone calls. We make sure we find out or go online and we check with 3 vendors. I wrote an article called Loyalty, and Alan, you edited that for me. It was about loyalty and becoming loyal. And too often people will sacrifice quality, service, and delivery to get a cheaper part, usually mark it up the same way and make less money. And I said that to that group that day. I said, if your part vendor here increased their parts across the board, every part they sell by 10%, most of you would make more money. And if they reduced every part they sell by 10%, most of you would make less money because we mark it up from cost. And by the way, I want to say something about List. I don't know if there's anybody online listening to this, you know, later on after the session, recorded session, about List. I'm going to encourage you never to use List. List is fictitious. List, I've talked to part vendors who say the list hasn't changed in 15 years. We look at the price, our cost went up, and so your cost goes up, but they don't touch list, because why would they take every part that increases and say, okay, now what would the new list price be? I know it sounds exaggerated, but I know for a fact that some people actually make up the list price. They just come up with something randomly. I'm talking about a major part vendor. They said, oh yeah, we just kind of come up with something. Don't use list price. To me, list is a takeout price. It's what you pay to pick up the part or have it delivered to you. But that's not what you're doing. You're not selling a part over the counter. You're not a takeout. You may sell some takeout parts, you know, but in most cases we're installing those parts. And you take that part and you hand it to a licensed, or in the US, an EST certified master tech, and they install that part correctly, and you provide a part warranty and a labor warranty, and you're going to stand behind it. You've done it right. That's no longer takeout. You don't expect to go to a grocery store and buy a steak and then go to a fancy restaurant and buy the steak for the same amount that you paid for it at the grocery store. Anyway, so back to this session. So this guy was giving the part vendor a hard time, and that bothered me because we were in their turf. We were on their turf. We were in their house, right? We were teaching there. And he was making it sound like this part vendor was really expensive. And I said, sir, if this was a different vendor, if this was Napa, if this was CarQuest, if this was WorldPack, if this was Auto Camping, if this was Uniselect, if this was Advance, whoever, you could have the same conversation. You could say you're too expensive here and you're too expensive there, and he spends all this time on parts. And I said, sir, what we're talking about here is putting paper in your printer backwards. I'm talking about how to get $45,000, $42,000, depending where you are, between $40,000 and $45,000 a month per technician. And then back to the software, I'm looking at people struggling over what to pay. And I don't know why, Kevin, but in that particular area, I see more people running their business with a program like QuickBooks than any other city I've ever trained. I don't know why that is. I love QuickBooks, use it all the time, used it for 15, 20 years, whatever. It's awesome, but it's not to run a shop with. It's purely an accounting package. And I'm looking at people, how much is it, how much is it, how much is it? And I want to encourage you, whenever it comes to you buying something for your business, whether it's a new lift or a new sign or hiring a brilliant technician. And by the way, one of the most brilliant things I've learned about hiring technicians is you don't hire a technician based on how much you're going to pay them. You're going to hire them based on how much you can charge for them. And I see a lot of people who will pay a brilliant technician more than their apprentice, more than their regular technicians, and they justify it. They say, I'll pay them $7 an hour more, or $8 an hour, 10, whatever. Well, then I'll say, do you charge more for them? Do you have a higher diagnostic rate? Well, no. Well, how do you justify paying somebody more because they're better, but not charging your customer more? I mean, really, if you're not charging higher for a diagnostic rate than your labor rate, you're really allowing people to have access to your brilliant technician for the same price as an apprentice. It's like when you go to your GP and you're in that office for 7 minutes or 8 minutes or 12 minutes or whatever it is, the healthcare system will pay an amount of money. And it could be anywhere from, I've heard, as low as $30 for that visit to $150. And you either pay for that or the healthcare system or insurance, whatever. But it's not a lot. But there's not a lot in there. You're sitting in that office. I'm in my doctor's office one day and I'm thinking, okay, there's a stretcher, there's some stirrups, there's a scale for weighing babies, there's a sink, the blood pressure machine, a couple chairs. There's not a lot in there. Last year I had a heart attack and I was in the hospital for, I think, 5 days. And I'm in this room, it's intensive care basically, and I'm looking around at all this equipment. And I said to one of the nurses, I said, I just got to ask, I've got to ask, I don't get a bill because I'm in Canada. It gets paid for. We pay for it other ways, right? But I said, what does it cost? And I think she said $8,500 a day just for the room. And there was a crash cart there because I had a heart attack, and they never used it because I didn't have another heart attack. But I'm looking at that machine and thought, somebody, the insurance company's paying for that room, that piece of equipment to sit in this room. It's parked here right now instead of someplace else. But it was $8,500 a day just for the room, and then the nurses are on top of that, and all the medications on top of that, and the blood pressure, all of the blood work and all of that is separate. Well, I don't know what it costs when they put the 2 stents in, and I'm in the whatever they call it, cath lab, I guess they call it cath lab, and I'm in there looking around at all this stuff, and I thought, this isn't costing somebody $30 to $150. I don't know what the surgery cost. But the point is that a brilliant surgeon, a heart surgeon, is going to get paid much more than your GP, and you're going to pay much more for that. So the bottom line is you need to pay for technicians. So back to the question about how do I pay for something? And over the years, I've heard so many people say, but how much does that cost? How much does that cost? And oh, can I afford that? And then there's other people that the money's there, and it doesn't matter that something's going to cost $2,000 or $150 a month or whatever the resource is. I've had people say, how much is all data? Identifix, you got to pay for Identifix. It's worth its weight in gold to pay for Identifix. The question is, where's your emphasis? Is your emphasis on where's the money going to come from, or is the emphasis on focusing on selling $40,000, $45,000 a month per tech? And I am going to be sending you a tool that you can calculate your own potential. So you're going to see your own potential and see where you're at with all of that. But that's where the emphasis needs to be. And the idea is whenever something costs you money, the question shouldn't be, how will I pay for this? The question should be, how's the customer going to pay for this? Because that's the way business works. When 9/11 happened and security cost airlines a lot more money, airlines pay for all that security at the airports. Well, we do when we buy tickets, but they have to charge us for that. When the price of fuel escalated, airlines didn't say, well, we're just going to make less money until the price of fuel comes down. They had to change the way they run their business. Some people don't even remember the days. Well, so I can remember the days where you're allowed to smoke on airplanes. That was bizarre. But it was free food, free drinks. Air Canada, I remember up in Canada, would provide free alcohol for the duration of your flight. They changed that a few years ago, of course, many years ago. They used to provide meals. And so how did they decide how they're going to pay for the extra fuel costs? The question was, how is the customer going to pay for it? And now we're accustomed to it. You go to the airport, unless you have a fancy, expensive ticket, you're paying for each piece of luggage that goes on that plane. And it makes sense because the luggage costs them more in fuel because it's heavy, and so we pay for that. And they took away the free food and they started charging us for the food. And they made changes to how they run the business, and they had to. The question wasn't, how are we going to pay for this extra money in fuel? The question was, how is the customer going to pay for that? And it's the same thing with your business. You need to decide when you're going to buy software, it's going to run your business better, you're going to be focused more, going to save you time. Well, the customer is going to benefit from that. So how do you factor that into your pricing? So back to that session in Ontario, I thought, isn't it interesting that the discussions here about how can I save a little bit of money on parts? If you're going to phone 3-part vendors and get a better price, and by the way, you sacrifice loyalty, you don't have a big enough hammer. I talked to one of my coaching clients 2 days ago in York, Pennsylvania, and he spends about $10,000 a month. And he said to me, quote, he said, I have a big hammer. And that's the point. They take care of him. Why? Because he's so loyal to them. And when you're loyal, they're going to take better care of you. And, loyalty can mean a free cruise. Loyalty with Bosch can mean money towards technical training. Vendors will reward you for your loyalty. But when you spend a little bit here and a little bit there, all that to try to make a little bit of extra money, and usually it works against you. So I want to encourage you to have the focus on sales and gross profit, not on expenses. So back to GPS, it shows you where you are, and I'm going to show you what we call key performance indicators on a spreadsheet, which I think is the minimum that you should know about your business. And then the GPS tells you, well, sorry, you tell it. It doesn't tell you. You say, this is where I want to go. And then step by step, it shows you how to get there. So there's 3 things that you need to know with financial management in your business. Where are you? Your key performance indicators. Where should you be? What's the benchmark? And how to get there. It's not good enough to know that I should have 50% gross profit on parts. How do I do that? It's not good enough to know that I need 90% productivity, 125% efficiency. How do I do that? It's not good enough to know that I should have lots of pre-booked appointments. The question is, how do I do that? And so that's what our training is about, is where are you? Let's calculate it. Where should you be? Here are the benchmarks, and I've changed the benchmarks over the years as things have changed with doing far more diagnosis, and it's a lot more expensive to run a shop now than it was before, and all these expenses have gone up. And lastly is we go through and show step by step on how that you need to get there. So you are here. I saw this on the internet. It's kind of like, that's a pretty big picture. You are here somewhere in that huge, great big maze of a universe. This is a bit dangerous. You are here. You don't want to be a mouse looking at a "you are here" sign and you're in the belly of the snake. Although being a self-employed person, sometimes you feel like you're in the belly of a snake. I find it interesting with business. You can go from loving your business to 2 hours later hating it. You can go from, wow, we finally made it to the next level, things are running smoothly, and in the afternoon you think, oh my God, this thing's falling apart, and what if we don't get enough customers in the door, and what are we going to do here? This next one, you are here, that's a little too close. Pretty obvious when you're standing there, you are here. You can start to micromanage it a little bit too much, and I want to encourage you to do what you need to do, but don't be completely out in the universe, but don't be such a micromanager that you're focused on the small things and the expression of stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. Whenever you go to a large mall or a large airport, having traveled a lot to huge airports, you want to know the map. You want to go to the map, and the most important thing to see in a large mall or a large airport or whatever building, you go to the map and you go, you are here. And I love when there's a great big red thing that says you are here. You need a starting point. Where am I at? And then you see where you want to go, and then you can see, well, I need to turn here and I need to go there and pass there and get there, and I get there. So 3 things again, and I know it sounds simple, but I know from experience that a lot of people don't know where they are in all of these areas. They don't really know where they should be, and then the question is, how do you get there? As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, there's only 3 ways that you can increase your profit in any business. This isn't automotive, this is any business. By the way, it's also the same for a nonprofit, it's also the same for a government. You can increase your sales, increase revenue, you can increase gross profit, and you can reduce expenses. And from my experience, I've seen so many people, too many people, focus on what can I do to reduce expenses? What can I do to reduce expenses? How can I cut here? How do I not pay for this? And I know a brilliant shop does extremely well in many ways, but he's running his business with QuickBooks. And I talked to him about shop management software. Yeah, but it costs money. And I'm going to get the cheapest software. Well, good software ain't cheap, and cheap software ain't good. Same with parts. Good software or good parts aren't cheap. Cheap parts aren't good. The focus sometimes can be on reducing expenses. Maybe there's some things that you can do, but I don't know a business, and I don't know that I've seen a business except maybe one that was in a facility way beyond what he should. His 30%, 35% actually, of his sales were going to rent. Well, that's ridiculous. He got into a building that he thought he'd grow into, and he didn't make it. Our benchmark, you'll see a little later on, is 5% of sales. But most shops are not going to do a lot better by simply reducing expenses. There's only so much that you can do there. And if we took the creativity, some of us, from what can I do to reduce expenses to what can I do to increase gross profit? What can I do to increase sales? The easiest of these, of course, number 2, is increase gross profit. I had a fellow that was on the session with just this past week, and he came to a session of mine in Toronto a couple of years ago, and he told me recently, he said, I went from $82 an hour to $87 an hour. And I said, okay, that's good. How many people notice? He said, nobody. Most people don't deal with you because of your labor rate. Most people don't even know what your labor rate is. Most people deal with you because they know you, they like you, and they trust you. And that's why they deal with you. This shop is a destination shop that I'm talking about. He's out in the country, and people go to there because they want him to work on the car. They trust him with their car just like they trust their doctor with their health. And it's not about labor rate. Anyway, we were on the phone the other day, and we're doing a coaching session. He said, you know what, Kelly, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And I'd recommended to him, I said, you know what, you should at least go to 100, because 100 makes estimating really easy. And I'm not saying everybody on this call should be at 100. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm not trying to do any antitrust things. Of course, we're in Canada. Antitrust isn't as big as a deal as it is in the US. But it's not about what your labor rate is per se. It's what are you paying your technicians and then factoring that in, and I'll show you how to do that. But with the labor rate, it's based on how much you pay your technicians primarily. But it's far more about increasing sales, increasing gross profit, and reducing expenses. And I'm going to show you a parts gross profit calculator, and I'm going to actually have Kevin do that. He does a lot of training with me, as I said. And anyway, back to the increasing gross profit is the simplest thing to do. And $100 an hour makes it simple because it's good estimating. At 1.2 hours, $120, 1.5 hours, $150. And I was just saying, you know, if you went to 100 just for that purpose alone, and on the call, he said, you know what, I'm going to do it. He said, I'm going to go to 100. And I don't exaggerate stuff. I don't make stuff up. I got an email from him this past week. Kevin, I forwarded it to you. And he said, Kelly, I went to 100. It's one of the best things I've ever done. Why did I doubt you? And I responded and said, Jeff, you did it. I didn't do it. I encouraged you to do it. And it reminds me, Alan, you're on the line here. There was a study that you guys did, I guess an independent company, and they look at an ad and they say, okay, what did the ad say? And kind of a focus group. I don't know what you called it. And I remember very clearly there was a guy that looked at the ad that I had for coaching. And his comment was, if somebody needs Kelly's help, they should have never started their business in the first place. And I looked at that and thought, wow, isn't that interesting? And the first thing that occurred to me was every professional athlete needs a coach, every one of them. Tiger Woods has a coach. Pat Phelps, best swimmer in the entire world, has a coach. Who's a better swimmer, Phelps or his coach? His coach isn't as good as a swimmer, but he still needs a coach because coaches do things for us. They inspire us, they motivate us, they challenge us, they have structure and they bring that structure. Every professional athlete has a coach, whether it's a football team or a hockey team. Football teams have many coaches, but coaching is really important. But I thought I knew what he meant. It's like you need to know all this stuff, but you can't know everything before you start a business. I don't know anybody, including myself, that knows everything. There's always things to learn. We learn and we learn and we learn. Anyway, I was impressed that he went up to 100 and he made it very clear. But he also calculated his effective labor rate, which to me is the most important KPI of all of them. I think the absolute minimum that you should know with your business is what I call the income statement analysis tool. Now, I know for some of you, this is going to be kind of basic. For some of you, it's going to be something that you've not seen before. And I just turn off the screen as I pull up. I have several spreadsheets that I want to show you. And as I mentioned, one of the biggest things that you need to know is how is the where am I at financially? And like I said, those shops in Ontario that I was mentioning, they all were on their game, and not just with productivity, efficiency, proficiency. I'm going to show you the composite that those shops use. So I want to show you what I call the income statement analysis tool. And this is the first thing that you need to start if you're not already tracking your numbers. I'm going to be sending you a blank one of these, and this is the one that I mentioned where for this particular session, I listened to the session I did on my birthday, March 21st, and I decided to make some changes with it today. Again, I'm going to send you this simple spreadsheet. Now, this is a real shop. I won't tell you the name of the shop, where it's located. I wanted to show this one to you because it's one technician. And in fact, as I spent an hour coaching with his service advisor yesterday, and I said, you know, I know that he would like to do better, and it's hard because he's a one-man show. Up until recently, he was the tech and the service advisor and wore all the hats. The nice thing about a big business is you have departments. There's a department that handles marketing and another one that handles sales and another one that handles maybe accounts payable and one that handles accounts receivable. But here in small business, you need to handle all of the marketing and the HR and all of those things, and again, interrupted 232 times a day. But I want to encourage you to take time away from your business to focus on the business. The old adage from Michael Gerber in his book, The E-Myth, and then the E-Myth Revisited, is that we spend so much time working in our business that we don't have time to work on the business. And I guess if you were to videotape yourself all day long and at the end of the day review and watch your video, I think you'd have a better understanding of how much of your day is actually spent managing the business and how much of the day are you a technician or a service advisor or whatever parts person that you have in the business. How much time do you actually spend on your financials? How much time do you spend on your marketing, etc.? So this is a real shop, and again, I'm going to send this to you. This is something you can literally do within about 5 or 10 minutes. Now, it does matter what your shop management system is. Some people, it's a bit convoluted. They need to get some information from the shop management system, some information they're getting from their QuickBooks or MYOB or whatever software you have for your bookkeeping, and some of it has to come from your balance sheet, some of it comes from maybe your year-end financials or your accountant or whatever. But if you get this down with your chart of accounts and simplify it, these are the things that you should know. Now, I've seen some people that don't have it as detailed as this, and I was working with a client the other day that had so many chart of accounts, and I said, it's so much information, it's too much information. It's like Google. You search for something. The problem with the internet isn't information, it's too much information, and determining what the best information is. I personally think that this is what your income statement should reflect: the sales, the cost of goods sold, etc. So this particular shop, again, a one-man show. This is 1 month. We can see that it was May of 2016. His labor sales were $11,797 and his parts sales $13,000. And as I mentioned, parts sales exceed labor sales in almost every single shop. In Canada, with our management groups, it was 100%. It's worthwhile to mention a fellow by the name of Jim. And Jim came to our management group quite some years ago. Alan, you know his shop. He was Shop of the Year a while back. And he said, Kelly, I really like your stuff, and he's doing a bunch of really neat stuff. And I don't exaggerate, he has over 1,000 pre-booked appointments. That's something he's honed in on. He's got like 7 or 8 loaner cars, and he does really well. But he's looking at our stuff, and he said, Kelly, he said, I think you're a little bit out to lunch. That's where he worded it. I think you're a little out to lunch with this labor to parts ratio. He said, this is a 3rd generation business. He said, my dad and his dad, he said, I've looked at their financial statements, and not one single time in all of those years, they've been in business longer than I've been alive, not once did they see more money from labor and parts. And he said, yeah, you teach good stuff, but I'm not so sure about this labor to parts ratio because we've never done it. That was in June. In September, I get an email from him, and he sends me this data, which was what we were using in the group at the time. He said, you're not going to believe this, Kelly. He said, but for the first time ever in the history of our business, we sold more money in labor, we collected more money. And as I started to say earlier, labor should be your highest amount. Labor should be, we'll tell you, it's $1.25. You should have $1.25 in labor for every dollar in parts. So if your labor sales were $125,000, then your part sales should have been approximately $100,000. Why should you see more money? As I mentioned, parts, you hardly ever sell parts without labor, and you oftentimes sell labor without parts. Maybe not every single day. Some of you, it is every day. Some of you, maybe it's a few times a week. But it's when a customer comes in and you do a brake inspection because they wanted it done, but they did need brakes, or you did a brake inspection, whether you charge for it or not. It's not the point. You did labor. You didn't sell them parts. A person comes to your shop. They say, I'm looking at buying this vehicle. Could you inspect it? You inspect the vehicle, and you tell them what you found wrong with the vehicle, and they go, forget it, I'm not going to buy it. Thank you very much. They pay for the inspection, leave. They bought labor. They didn't buy parts. Sometimes it's 2 hours of diagnosis, and the solution's a butt connector. And about 83% of the vehicles that come to your shop need to be diagnosed or inspected before you can work on it. And so we sell labor without parts. How very rarely do we sell labor, parts without labor. So that's one of the reasons labor should be higher, but also the gross profit. Now, if you take a look down here with the gross profit indicators, we have the benchmarks, and labor gross profit, as you see down here, should be 70%. For the purpose of training, we teach 45% gross profit on parts. For the purpose of our management groups, we want to see that at 50. So when you sell labor at 70% gross profit, and you sell labor oftentimes without parts, and hardly ever do you sell parts without labor, and maybe your parts GP is 45 to 50, well, then there should be more money from labor. And it's really simple. We give away labor. We don't give away a part. We don't give somebody an alternator, a starter, a BCM, PCM. We don't do that. But sometimes 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there. And I guess the question you need to ask yourself is, how much free work has your shop done? How much work have you done that you didn't get paid for? And anyway, back to this. So the labor sales at this shop, so when I focus on with this client, I say, well, we need to get your labor gross profit up. We need to get your labor sales up. His sublet, $846. He sold $3,307 worth of tires. Not a huge amount, but it wasn't tire season. His shop supplies were $704. So all you need to do is go through whatever data you have, fill this in, and then over here we've got the cost of goods sold. What did you pay for the labor? And I want to be clear here, labor is a cost of goods sold. It's not an expense. That's one thing I learned from Bob O'Connor, and I wholeheartedly believe is the right way to do it. Every day you buy parts, you mark them up for desired gross profit, and you sell them. Every single day you buy time. You buy time from technicians. You pay them whatever hourly amount it is, whether it's flat rate, it doesn't matter, or hourly or salary. You're buying that labor and you're selling it, which becomes the labor rate. So just so you know, the cost of sales here for labor is your technician's direct wages only. It does not include any payroll benefits or burdens. Benefits are something that you provide that you don't have to. The law doesn't say you have to provide health care or maternity leave or pharmaceutical or whatever. Those are optional. Benefits are something that you choose to do. Burdens are things that you have no choice. You have to pay workers' compensation. In Canada, there's EI, there's CPP, workers' compensation, holiday pay. In the US, and holiday pay is mandatory in Canada. It's not in the U.S. In the U.S., of course, you've got SUTA and food, etc. And so with your direct wages, this is what you pay your technician, excluding any of that. So take their hourly rate, multiply it out, and you can see on your, hopefully in your income statement, what you paid for that labor without any of the payroll benefits and burdens. What did we pay for the parts? And again, tires need to be separated out from the parts. My client yesterday that sells parts over the counter, and he ships them out. I said, okay, on your income statement analysis tool, I'd like you to put the sale of. Now, it became part of the chart of accounts, which, Kevin, you and I have had this discussion. A lot of people have not set up the chart of accounts correctly. So I suggest if you sell parts over the counter, put the sales here, the cost there. If you rent out a part of your building, I should say, some people do that to a detailer or something, what did you charge for the rent? And of course, there's no direct expense against that. Some people sell cars, so what did you sell the cars for? What did you pay for them? Anything that is in addition to these things, you can simply put it into the other category. And so $30,000 is not bad for a one-man show. In fact, as I commend him, now, he's not just working 8 hours a day to accomplish that, he's working a lot more than that. Just so you know, you put in how many months up here, pretty obvious that these are the same because it's a 1-month statement. But if you did this for an entire year, then it's going to divide that out and show you what the monthly amount was. The ratio is really important here. We see that 39% of the money that came in the door came from labor. We want to see that at 50 to 55%. It's down on the right-hand side. You don't need to make a note of that. 39% sucks. Now, it's not horrible. I was talking with a client the other day and I said horrific, and he said, can we come up with a different word than horrific? I said, sure, but it's horrific. 39% is not good. When you're selling labor without parts and labor gross profit is higher and only having 39% of the money come from labor. So this shop has a major labor leak, and that's what we're focusing on, but now he knows what it is. 45% of the money that came in the door came from parts. Sublet was 3%, tires was 11%, shop supplies was 2%. Which, by the way, we'd like to see that at 8. Now we see the cost of labor, and then we see the gross profit over here to the right. His labor gross profit, after he paid himself, in this case that $3,849, was what he paid himself, direct wages, as a technician. So his labor gross profit was 67%. So it's not too bad with his gross profit based on what he's paying himself and his labor rate, but his labor rate's 105, we see down there. So it's pretty good, but the problem is selling the hours. The parts gross profit, 43%. He's in a group now. I want him to see him at 50, so we need to get that up. His sublet, well, he's doing 59% gross profit on sublet. I said, why don't you just sublet everything out and just become sublets or us and then make more money because you're above the benchmark. Of course, that's a joke, but 6% on tires, that's horrible, like completely horrible. Maybe I need to come up with a better word than horrible, but it sucks. I'm sure there's another word for that, but we make it clear. By the way, Bob O'Connor, for those of you that are online that knew him, I traveled with him and he would teach, and you would never wonder what he meant. Like he'd say, have you ever had a technician slower than dog snot? And I thought, oh boy, that must be pretty slow. And then the next time I'd hear him teach it, he said, you ever have a technician slower than human snot? And I thought, which is slower, Bob? And by the way, he passed away about 5 years ago. I had an amazing opportunity to go down and spend a full week in his home, him and his wife Linda and their two sons, Robert and John, and spent a lot of time with him, literally on his hospital bed in his living room. And I was there for the week, and I wanted the family, to have their own time with that. And he passed away the next week, and I went back to speak at his funeral. But I said, one thing I love about Bob is he made things clear. And so I think when you say something sucks, it's pretty clear what that means. Shop supplies, just for the record, you don't need to track that. It's a little bit maybe micromanagement. It's because you need to know every time you bought a shop supply from a part vendor and you got the invoice, what were the parts portion of that, what were the shop supplies portion of that. So if you track the sales of your shop supplies, but you don't track the shop supplies cost, that's totally fine. So back down here, his labor $805, one technician, that's him. He now has, by the way, a full-time advisor. Again, I was coaching with her yesterday. Number of repair orders he wrote in the month, 82, that's a lot. He was open for 20 days. Now it says 8 hours a day, that's not really accurate. They say once you're self-employed, you only have to work half a day. 12 hours a day is a half a day. His overall gross profit is 49%. We want him to be at 60, so he's 11% low there. His labor gross profit is 3% low. His parts GP, because he's in a group, I want 50 there. I like to see 50, so he's 7 points low there. His labor mix, he's not selling enough labor. It tells them that his hourly revenue is $267.92. I love this part of it. Labor potential, he could have sold, if he sold all the hours that he was there, $16,800. He only sold $11,797. So that means he sold 70% of his labor. His repair order size is actually pretty good, $367. I mean, it's not phenomenal, but it's pretty good. He's working on about 4 cars a day, so he does not have a car count problem. It means himself working on 4 cars in a day. We like to see 3. He's selling 1.4 hours per repair order. It's not phenomenal. The average shop's 1.1, 1.2. And by the way, when it comes down to the expenses, not all of these have a benchmark. As I mentioned, with rent, 5%. His rent is $1,430 a month. Isn't that not phenomenal? And he's in Ontario, by the way, the GTA, Greater Toronto area, 4.8%. And he's doing not bad. I mean, he's got $9,000 net profit, 32.32%. So he's doing pretty good there. Now he's hired an advisor. And he has thought for a long time, how am I going to pay for an advisor? How am I going to pay for an advisor? And I said, you need an advisor. You cannot be a technician and be a service advisor at the same time, back and forth all the time. There's 2 words I don't like to use, always and never, but in classes I'll say, for those of you that don't have a service advisor, how many times have you been able to work on a car to completion without one single interruption? And the answer has always been never. And I said, you don't look at your current amount of money and think, how am I going to pay an advisor out of that? You need to say that I'm going to sell an extra hour a day, and I show the value of an extra sold hour a day, put together a spreadsheet on that. If you can sell an extra hour in a day, you can pay for an advisor. You sell an extra hour a day per tech, you can paint your building, you can re-epoxy the floor, you can get good shop management software, whatever it happens to be. For the purpose of this, I'm going to encourage you, because I'd like to see you be able to do this in 5 or 10 minutes, is instead of going through and putting all of your expenses there, this is not going to mirror image your income statement. If 100 people brought their income statement to a class and we looked at them, there wouldn't be 2 identical. There just wouldn't. And so I'm going to encourage you to take whatever expenses you have, put it under line 42 called waste disposal, a good place to put expenses, and you're going to see your bottom line there. If you were to go through and fill all of that in, really all it's going to do is show you the percentage, and hopefully you're seeing that on your income statement anyway. Now I decided I wanted to show you one more of these. That was a one-man show. And what I want to do is I pulled up one that is 7 technicians, and I wanted to give you a sense of a smaller shop and a bigger shop, but the percentages, the benchmarks are identical. Again, these are real numbers for a real shop. Their labor sales were $903,000, the part sales $570,000. That is a shop that knows how to sell their labor for sure. They have some other unique problems. The sublet was $18,000, tire $17,000. This is a 12-month period. His shop supplies $24,000, which is good, but it's only 2% of sales, so we want to see that higher. I'm going to be sending you, along with the recording of this and the spreadsheet, a couple others, a document. Kevin, if you can make a note of that, please. I'm going to send you how to get your shop supplies up by using shop supply kits. I'm not sure what that is in this particular case, but we want to separate that out so we're seeing accurate numbers above. Then, of course, we see the labor that he paid for that. The gross profit, we can take a look at after he paid. His technicians were $316,794. And again, this is where it does it monthly, by the way. So his sales were $903,000. Because up here we put 12 months, we can see that his sales are about $75,000 a month in labor. His overall sales, $128,000. And you'll see how many technicians over here to the right. His labor gross profit after he paid his technicians, $587,000. His parts were $254,000. Sublet was $1,945,000. And again, the dollars aren't as much important as the percentage. His labor gross profit, 65%. Our benchmark is 70 to 75, but you'll see that below there. So he's doing pretty good. Can certainly see some improvement there. His parts gross profit is only 45%. So understand that if he was able to get his parts GP up to 50%, the part sales is going to come up and be a little bit more in line with the labor. His sublet, again, 11%. We want that to be 30. He needs to focus on how to do better at selling labor. His tire gross profit is not horrific, but it's not great. We want to see 30, so I work with him and trying to get that tire gross profit up. Shop supplies, again, he doesn't track at all. He's pretty good at tracking it. He's breaking it out. Again, you don't have to do that. His labor rate, just so you can see, $102 an hour. He has 7 technicians, so the sales per month per technician are not that great, actually. He wrote to have 7,560 repair orders. He was open 252 days, and the average technician is there 9 hours in a day. Now, it says hours open per day, but that really is how many hours are your technicians there each on average. The key performance indicators. It's GPS. Where is he? We tracked it. The benchmark is where he should be, and the question is, how do I get from where I am to where I need to be? His overall gross profit is 57%. He should be at 60. He's 3% low there. His GP labor is 65%. We want him to be at 70 for the purpose of our management groups. We're looking at higher performance there. We want 75, so he's at least 5 to 10% low there. His parts GP, again, it looks like he's at benchmark. And a management group, I would like to see that come up 5%. And if you gross up those part sales that we just looked at over here, if we gross that up by another 5%, that's going to be a significant amount of money, more than enough money to pay for fresh paper and pay for monthly software fees or whatever. He was open 252 working days in the year, 9 hours in a day. Back down to this. So he's a little bit low on some of these. His labor mix is actually really good. He's really good at selling labor. Obviously, a lot of diagnosis. Could be that his labor, I think that he was putting all of his oil changes under labor and not separating labor than parts, so we needed more accuracy there. His hourly revenue calculates out at 173. If he sold all the hours that were available to him, he could have done 1.529 million. He only sold 903, so the shop proficiency is 59%. So again, a 1-shop example, a 7-shop example. This guy almost can do as much in sales with half as many people. I had a fellow in Alberta, where I lived, in fact, as the technician that I got my car repaired at for years and years. And I encouraged him to go to a group meeting because I think everybody should be in one group or in some form of a group. And he went off to the group, and I went in to see him the next day, and I said, what did you think of the meeting? It wasn't my group, it was somebody else's. And he said, well, he said, I sat there and I'm looking at the financial data because in groups we share financial information. And he said, I look up and think, oh, the poster child for the group, the star performer, the one that gets written up in the magazines, he's amazing. His sales weren't much better than mine. He said, I looked at the labor rate. We were both at the same amount. They were about 30 kilometers or 20 miles separate of proximity. And he said, I'm looking at that and thinking his parts GP is pretty close to mine. He's doing a little bit better. But he said, I didn't want to say anything, he said, because I thought they'd think I'm arrogant. But this is my first meeting. And I'm looking at numbers of the poster child and thinking, you know, I'm already there. Like, why would I join a group when, I mean, I'm there? He said, I was almost, you know, got my peacock feathers out and I didn't want to say anything, but he thought if I say something, they're going to just think I'm bragging. And he said, but they scrolled down on the data and he saw that the star performer had 2 technicians and this guy had 5. And all of a sudden his feathers fell. He said, oh my God. He said, he's doing as good as I am with 2 technicians and I have 5. So this shop has 7 technicians. It doesn't mean it's doing a good job. And I'm sure people can relate to this. You have a tech, you fired them or they quit and you don't replace them right away. And then you realize, oh my goodness, we're doing as well or better with 1 less technician. And the challenge is when you've got more technicians, you need more advisors. So that expense is up. The shop that I was talking about, the poster child, 2 techs, 1 advisor is a really good mix. That is our benchmark, 3 maximum. And when you've got 5 technicians, you need at least 2 service advisors. So that expense is going up as well. So that was an eye-opener for him. He's only selling 203 hour or dollars in an average invoice. That's not very good. He's working on 30 cars a day. He doesn't have a car count problem. The labor hours per repair are 1.2, which is where the average shop is. And because he didn't fill in the expenses, he certainly did not do 56% net. Now, one other tool that I want to show you, which is my absolute favorite, and it's really been neat working with Kevin over the last while, and I'm going to have him just go in shortly here and show you the gross profit calculator and how to sell parts properly. But I call this document what I call the power of team. And this document, if you've seen training, you think, oh my God, I've seen this so many times. And years ago it was manual, now it's electronic. But when I was teaching this session in March last month, I saw something that I never thought of with this spreadsheet before. And then I was doing it in the evening and I saw something in the spreadsheet that I've never thought of showing before that way. I was on a session where Kevin, my counterpart, was showing my spreadsheet, and he showed me something. I thought, oh my God, I've never seen it like that before. And I'll show you a couple of those quick things. But even those of you that have seen this before, I'm going to show you a couple of things that we've not looked at before. We talk about hours or sales per month, dollars per month per technician. By the way, we didn't say specifically how long this class is, just to let you know. It typically goes 2 hours. The last 15 minutes or so is a question and answer period. And of course, if you've got questions, you don't want to ask them online. We're going to open it up to the chats and you can ask questions there. So it let you know that we're going to be approximately another half hour and then we'll turn it over to questions. Productivity is simply defined as how much time does a technician spend working on income producing work. The average shop only spends 60% of the day working on stuff that makes money. The rest of the day is wasted. 100% efficiency, book calls for an hour, takes a technician an hour. If we, in fact, are able to, I just noticed the word efficiency spelled incorrectly in this particular one. I apologize for that. Alan was my editor for 8 years. He saw lots of typos. Hours produced, 100 hours. That sucks. You bought 168 hours, or at least you had 168 hours there of a technician in a month. We sold 100. What happens to the other 68? If you sold 160, or if you bought 168 spark plugs, you'd wonder what happened to the 68 if you only sold 100. In an above average shop, they're there 168 hours as well. It's not like they're spending more time there. They are 75% productive, so they spend 75% of the day working on stuff that makes money. Efficiency, they're faster at it, they're better at it. Again, we're looking at GPS here, correct? Where are you? Where should you be? And then the question is, how do you get there? And we certainly can't do the whole how do you get there in one short webinar like this. It is my favorite subject, by the way. Hours produced, 141. Now, 141 is certainly better than 100, but it certainly isn't the 168. In an awesome shop, or what I call a team shop, our management group, 168 hours, the benchmark, and I know from seeing financial statements that, in fact, the average awesome shop is actually higher than this. They're 95% productive. Why? There's lots of reasons for that. They're pre-booking appointments. They're organized. They've got equipment in place. They've trained their technicians. They've got a great team that's working together. They're good at estimating. They're pre-ordering the parts. There's a lot of reasons why a shop will spend more time working on income-producing work than another. The average awesome technician in North America is actually 135% efficient. In this case, we're looking at a benchmark of 125. The beauty is 189 hours, which is actually more hours than you bought. You had a technician there for 168, but because they were faster, you sold more hours. And they should be faster. You've invested in tools and equipment, and you've got Mitchell On Demand and AllData and IATN and great shop management software, and you've sent them off to training, and the better we get, the more we should make. Some people get better, it doesn't take as long, and they don't justify charging as much because they spent less time on it because you were good. At the same labor rate across the board, let's take a look at the labor potential. This shop is doing $10,000 a month. This shop's doing $14,000 a month in labor only. This shop's doing $19,000. And yes, I am sending you the spreadsheet. This is a way that you can set your own goal. The purchase potential, the parts to go along with that. Again, when you sell the labor, the parts, the sublet, the tires, the towing, the shop supplies goes along with that. You need to solve the labor leak. This shop can do $19,000. If a technician is more productive, spends more time working on stuff that makes money, and is more efficient, faster at it, you are going to sell more parts. You're going to sell more of everything else to go along with that. We take a look at the total performance. Here's a shop doing $20,000 a month on average. Here's a shop doing $28,000. Here's a shop that's doing $38,000. Now, I want to show you that shop that I was talking about in British Columbia, Scott's shop. Again, they track productivity, efficiency, proficiency. So they're selling about 215 hours out of 168. I believe his labor rate's 134, pretty sure. So he actually, I should say, you should be doing $57,000 a month, not your 53. But I wanted to show you that I don't just pull these numbers out of the air. These are real numbers. This happens every day. Whether you track it or not, whether you track productivity or not, it still happens. At the end of today, your technicians will have been such and such a percent productive and will have been such and such a percent efficient. So that's a really good numbers. When you're doing, you know what, yeah, those. Let's just do that same math here, because that's a star performer, and I don't want to just take a look at, you know, the poster child, so to speak. Still $50,000 a month if your labor rate's 134. Now, if your labor rate is 89, some people online probably pretty close to that, you can still do $33,000 a month in sales per month per technician. The biggest impact isn't the $89 an hour, it's times how many hours that you sold. Here's one of the problems, and I realized it when I did this class last time. I thought, you know what? We had a lady on the class, her name's Susan, and Susan took training probably 20 years ago, her and her husband, they're in Ontario, and they said, you know what, when we figured out effective labor rate, when we realized what our labor rate actually is, and when we fixed that, and of all the lines in our composite, my favorite is effective labor rate. When all is said and done, how much did you actually collect per hour? The average independent repair shop is 67% effective labor rate. In other words, if your labor rate's 100, you're not collecting 100 when you're doing an oil change. You're not collecting 100 probably on a brake inspection. You're probably not collecting 100 when you're doing inspections of some kinds. You're probably not making 100 when you're doing diagnostics if it takes longer, but you don't charge as much for that. You're not making 100 if you offer a 25% off or a 5% off or a 10% off coupon. You're not making that money for every single hour. So the difference here is if you're at 67%, where the average shop is at, take a look at what happens with these numbers. This number is really important. What's your effective labor rate? What you say you charge and how much you actually charge are two totally different things. So that brings that number down significantly. And you're going to see in the composite here shortly that there are people that are over 100%. And again, you can do this for a full year. Technicians working 50 weeks a year, couple weeks off for vacation, holiday, sick time. And so 2,000 hours, approximately 50 weeks, 40 hours a week, then you'd be able to see what the actual amount is. One last thing I want to show you that I figured out when Kevin was doing this is if you're paying for 168 hours a month, and I'll bring that back down so we can compare 168, you're paying for 168 whether you're an average shop, an above average shop, or an awesome shop, unless you're performance-based paid, but most people pay hourly. So the question is, if you go from, and let's bring this back up, and I'll just use a simple $100 an hour labor rate, and again, effective labor rate is even more important than that, $100. When you sell 100 hours in a month, you sell 141 hours a month, your cost doesn't change. You're still paying 168 hours in a month, and if you're selling 189 hours a month per technician, you're still paying for 168. So the point is that shop, this shop, average shop, above average shop, team shop, their payroll is pretty much the same on average per technician. So really, when you go from selling 6 hours a day to that 7th hour a day, your cost is the same. You're paying for whether you sell it or not. So your additional gross profit on that next hour is 100%. There's a person, I believe, on this line that's doing 11 hours a day. That's 3 hours that you don't have to pay for because they're getting paid for 8 because they're hourly. So you have 100% gross profit on 3 hours a day, and that's where the money is made on the productivity, efficiency, and the labor rate. Okay, one other thing I want to show you, and again, we're looking at financials. When I was looking at the material for this, and I went, oh, spreadsheet, spreadsheet, spreadsheet. And that's the point, really, is that when you're really on your numbers like these people are, the difference is absolutely huge. Kevin, I'm going to turn this over to you, and instead of showing the gross profit calculator, I'm only going to show the algorithmic one, and to let you know you're going to be receiving this spreadsheet as well. So Kevin, if you could take over here, just a quick introduction for yourself, please, and then we'll go through the gross profit calculator.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. So Kevin King, I'm a coach. I have aspirations to be a coach like Kelly does. My current vocation is working with GemCar, implementing software. I have a long history in the background of parts. I come from the supply chain, writing service, collision facilities, managing body shop, selling paint, body shop materials. So labor, efficiency, and drive, I really have a lot of experience in that. And implementation, that's one of the things that, you know, for Kelly and I, that's the greatest satisfaction. I don't know how to describe it to you other than, and I'm sure Kelly will attest to this, that when we see somebody take an idea that we're not creating brand new energy here, but we've learned something from here, or I've traveled there and somebody gives me an idea, I say, oh, I'm gonna share that with a group of 60 or 100 people. The greatest compliment that I see is when you implement it. You take that and you get the direct benefit from something that we've learned that we're able to share. So for myself, as I'm implementing software, repair shop management software, and I'm teaching shops how to, no, you can't sell that tire without labor. You have to have labor, now include the tire, bundle that, because it's going to negatively affect you if you just sell the tire, including the installation, tire levy, and any waste disposal. Your numbers are going to be skewed. So for me, when I'm working with small shops, I really see the impact of how I can help them understand just the little things, right? You need to isolate your labor from your parts sale in order to calculate everything properly. So for myself, I see it on the very entry level all the way up to the bigger shops that I still find it's the same lesson, the labor inventory, how they have to start tracking it. So I'm excited to be part of the project, and the stuff we're going to talk about today, Kelly's tool that he's going to include, you're going to get a chance to see it. I think it's just great. It can go right side by side with whatever you're doing now. If you're doing pen and paper, great. If you're using QuickBooks, wonderful. If you're using a GemCar, this can be implemented into your GemCar. We've designed it so that it's capable to be put in there automatically. If you have software and you believe you have a parts matrix, I'm saying unequivocally, you cannot trust it unless you personally did it and you have checked it in the last 90 days. We're going to, Kelly will give you stories of people that we've worked with. Oh, yeah, my software that has a parts matrix. No, it doesn't. Because if you haven't checked it, how do you know somebody else didn't go in there? How do you know the database that I gave you included it or didn't include it? If you might even be one of my customers that's hearing this. What I'm saying to you is that here is a tool that you can run side by side with your management, put in the cost, see what it calculates, and compare it to what you believe to be the result that you're getting. And that's the difference with what Kelly's talking about, knowing where you're at, where you want to go, and where you want to be. Here's a tool, once again, to help you, even when you believe that you have shop management software that is calculating a parts matrix. Great. Kelly, anything to clarify on that, or you want to just go right in and we'll use the example?
Go ahead with the 2650 and why I chose that.
Okay. So in this example here, as you can see on the left-hand side, Kelly's calculated all the different, he's requested, and somebody has calculated for him. I always give him credit, and he tells you after how that really works. But the purchase price from $0 to $2.99, it's going to calculate at an 80% gross profit. At $3 to $8, it's going to calculate at a 75% gross profit. The reason that the way this spreadsheet is designed is because the sweet spot, the target market of your average part that you're going to purchase is going to be in the $25 to $35 price range. One of the ways you can determine that is at your jobber where you buy your parts from. They quickly, they analyze that. They know exactly what you buy. They are a partner with you. They're the part and partner. If you ask them and you say, hey, take my average purchases, tell me what my average purchase price is, you're going to find that you're going to fall in that range between the $25 and $35. That's the sweet spot. So when you sell an item that's below and a low hose clamp, fuse, miniature bulb, items that are insignificant in gross dollars, the margin has to be higher in order for us to get you to that level that Kelly wants you to be at, which is at a 50% gross profit or 55%, depending on if you're in a team or in a management group. So the way this sheet is designed is it takes the emotional bank rate out of it. You put in your purchase price. In this example, he chose the sweet spot, $26.50. So you're going to put in the purchase price, $26.50. You hit enter, and it's going to calculate at an 80% and give you the selling price. Kelly, could you go ahead and hit enter on the $26.50? So in this example, he's taken the sweet spot, which is going to be your average part purchase between 25 and 35, and it's calculating at a 60%. But this is an algorithmic parts matrix. If you just bought something at 1 penny different between the $25.01 and $25, you can see on the right-hand side that the margin, the gross desired profit, is going to be off by 5 percentage points. So the way that he's designed this is that basically because you sold something for 1 penny more, you shouldn't be penalized as a shop to lose 5 gross points. So the calculation is taking into consideration from the $1 all the way up through. So it's calculating the first dollar at 80%, $1 at 75, $4 up at 70%, all the way through, so that you're maximizing the true profit, gross profit of that item. So when you enter the $26.50, it's going to calculate that your GP is going to be 64.25%. The profit in dollars is $47.63, and your selling price will be $74.13. So the idea here is you run this side by side. You just put in the purchase price of whatever you're buying. You don't even think about it. It calculates it for you. Put it in. By using that tool, the implementation alone, we found, Kelly, it's 53,000, correct? From previous customers, if they were to start implementing it from the comparison that we did, the gross dollars in profitability?
We calculated actually that one meeting that you were on, and I did some quick calculations. The average shop can do $53,000 net profit a year simply by going from what they're doing to using a matrix. I just want to show you, for those of you that have seen the matrix before, the difference between the one that we just showed you. And as Kevin mentioned, if you sell a part for $3, and it's the nature of how a matrix works. I mean, you need to get a higher gross profit on lower ticket items, and you're going to get a lower gross profit on a higher ticket item. There's more money, but less gross profit in dollars. You can't get 80% gross profit on tires or any, you're not going to get 80% gross profit on an engine or a transmission down here. You're going to get maybe 30% on that. But here was one of the issues that I realized, that if a part increased by 1 cent, the matrix brought it down to 12.05. And it's the nature of a matrix, because this number has to decrease, right? And this number, of course, is going to increase, how much you paid for it. And as we mentioned, the sweet spot here is this. If you're selling, if you say I can't get 80% on things less than $3, well, coffee shops certainly get over 90% gross profit on a cup of coffee. It's a small amount of money. We just pay for it without thinking about it. Really, where the sweet spot is, if you can get 55, 60% between 25 and 45, you're going to go a long way in doing that. So as he mentioned, here you've got a part that's $25, and it sold for $71.43, but all of a sudden the price went up by 1 cent, and now you're getting $62.53. And so, and I always turn the screen off between just so it's a little simpler, easier on the eyes. But what I did with the algorithmic calculator, and again, I hired somebody to put together the spreadsheet itself. I hired somebody who was extremely OCD and one of the most analytical people I know. And I said, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to make this, instead of going from 80% down to 75, 5% difference, if you could do 79.5, 79, 78.5. Well, he decided that he would do it differently and go down 79.99, 79.8. The other thing about this matrix that I liked is it's just one spot where you enter the price. So if you bought a part for $145, you enter it, and instantly it tells you that the gross profit on that part was 47.63%. The profit was $131.85, and you sold it for $276.85. So again, it doesn't matter what you paid for the part. You phone around and get a better price. You're probably going to make less the idea is use your parts matrix. At the same time, we also recommend that you have the absolute best warranty in the industry. So just so you know, I'm going to send you both of those spreadsheets, and the reason I'm going to send you both is because the this one that we just showed you, the algorithmic, is far too complex to put into a shop management system. I'm well aware of most shop management systems up there, and I've not seen one that actually allows you to build in a matrix that is that complex. I do recommend, because it takes seconds, as you saw, to price something, that you use it as an Excel spreadsheet right on your computer. One last thing I want to show you with spreadsheets. Now, this is the one that we use for our groups. This won't be sent to you if you're in a group, of course, yes, but where ultimately I think you should be headed is with this. And interesting, I was hired by a Canadian parts company, one of the largest, and they said, Kelly, what do you do for management groups? They wanted to compete with another parts company that had management groups across the country. In fact, I used to run those. And so I sent this off to this lady, her name's Linda, and her response was, oh my God, this is too complicated. This is way too complicated for people. I have used many spreadsheets over the years. Bob O'Connor had a composite in its day. It was very good. Today it would be considered very dated. There's ones that I use with WorldPac in the US. Wasn't great. He introduced this one to them. And I love it because this is the ultimate where you should be headed. This is not kindergarten. This is not grade 5. This is university level. This ultimately is where you should be headed. But if this is new to you, the whole financial stuff, start with the one I'm sending you, income statement analysis tool. 5 or 10 minutes a month, you're going to see at least some key performance indicators, and then you're going to be able to step into that. Now, what she said was, this is too complicated, and I said, yes, but it needs to be. If you come to a management group, which is the upper echelon, so to speak, and I'm showing you something that you're already doing, you go, well, why should I join a group or take more training when I'm already there? But ultimately, where you should be is seeing all of this data. Now, typically it tiles. The phone gets a little wonky when I scroll down, so I'll stop talking as I show you this. This is 176 lines. Now, it's not exactly, because some of those lines are just the percentages and some blanks in between, but it's well over 150 lines of financial data. Ultimately, this is where I believe that you should be heading to. And just so you know, I have a session where you take it and you learn how to do this. You get the spreadsheet, you fill in the data. But what I love about it is it now allows you to see month after month after month after month. When I ran the management groups in Canada, it was okay, but you were seeing a month at a time. Another group I ran in Ontario, another person took over for me when I came back to Western Canada, and his composite was great, but it was 1 month at a time, so you didn't have an opportunity to see month after month where you're headed with this. One of my favorite things about this composite is it tracks your trending, like I said, but it tracks your net profit. So this is a real shop. In January they did $19,000 net, and then February they did another 11,000, as you see there, but now they're up to 30,000, 53,000, 60,000. So you're seeing this accumulation month after month. So even if you have a bad month, you think, oh, February sucked, but we still made $30,000 net. And just so you know, we can take a look at the data here. This is not a shop that wasn't paying themselves well. They were paying themselves $5,100 a month as a salary. Look at that. In July, he gave himself a raise. But the management salary in this particular case is a husband and wife team, so they're making, oh my gosh, $15,000 a month between the two of them, and then all of that net profit to go along with that. So I know this may seem overkill for a lot of people on the call, but ultimately start with the ISAT and then slowly work into, and some of you may be already here, I think that's great. One thing that I want to say is every one of those shops that I took Terry to in BC is using this exact same composite. They were in our management group years ago. They worked with another company and they built this, and I was doing some training off in BC, and I've seen maybe 7 or 8 composites, and we were on Vancouver Island and we're on the ferry boat coming back. The guy that hired me, he was the facilitator for the group, and he said, I'd like to show you our composite. And I said, okay, I'd like to see it. And I started drooling as I saw this because it's the best I've seen, and I said I need to buy this, so I actually bought it. Now I actually own it, which is great. So I didn't create this composite. A lot of the data came from training we did, yes, the data we'd like to see. The one thing I wanted to focus on was the effective labor rate. This shop, I should say, a real shop, their labor rate was $89 an hour. And the effective labor rate is how much did they actually collect. So every month you want to see, now you don't want to do this every day, but you want to see where am I at. I'm at $80.88 when I say I collect 89, because some jobs collect less than $89 an hour, like an oil change. Some collect more, like you do a charging system diagnosis, you charge the customer $39 or $60 or $70, whatever it is. It takes 5 minutes. The effective labor rate is hundreds of dollars an hour. If we could just do those all day long, right? If the tech takes longer, then of course the effective labor rate is lower. If we use a coupon, it's lower. If we don't charge for all the time, it's lower. The reason effective labor rate is my favorite calculation is because it takes into consideration your productivity, your efficiency, your proficiency, your discounting. It takes into consideration your car count. All of these things come to a head, and you say, how much did I actually collect? And as I mentioned, it's about percentage, not about dollars. So it doesn't matter if the shop's 89, somebody else in the group is at 128, somebody else is 142, somebody else is at 64. What we want to know is what percentage of that did you actually collect? And the fellow that I just mentioned that on the call this week went up to $100, or last week I should say, $100. He went from 87 to 100. He said it was easy to do and people haven't noticed. But even that, he's told me his labor rate was 87 and his effective was 47. He wasn't collecting 87 an hour. I mean, really, if you're going to quote your labor rate to people, we don't suggest you do. That's part of the training, but we suggest that you say it's variable because it is variable. You don't charge $89 an hour for every single thing that you do. But if you really want to be accurate with people, if you really want to be honest with people, like, full disclosure, well, we say it's 89, but, well, this month was actually $80.88. In February, it was only $79.74. It changes every single month. And so we can see with the shop that they actually got up to technically $100 an hour, which is 112.36%. Our benchmark, just so you know, here is 135%. So I want to encourage you, effective labor rate. The reverse way to do this, scary math, take how many hours you paid your technicians last month, multiply that by your labor rate, and see what your labor sales would have been if you charged a customer for every single hour that you sold. Okay, I want to just show you some of the things that we have created. For those of you that know, I've not been on the road much doing training. I'm back here in Calgary, living close to my family again. I spent some time in British Columbia, some time in Vancouver. It's really good to be back here. And I haven't been idle. I've been working on some really neat stuff. And just so you know, we just launched our first ever management group. And the two things, as I mentioned, that these shops have in common is the financial stuff. They know their numbers. And the second is these people that I'm talking about are in some kind of management group. Bob O'Connor, again, started groups. One of my clients that was in his groups was very happy. He listened to he knows Bob from many, many years ago. He was in Bob's group. And he was happy to see the memorial to him. I'm just going to go through this quickly to get back to where we were. We went into the spreadsheets there. Income statement analysis tool is minimum where you should be. What I want to encourage you to do is to take a look at key performance indicators and think about it from a GPS perspective. Where am I? Calculate that. Where should I be? What are the benchmarks? And how do I get there, which is the most important part. That was a live session we did. Just so you know, I have a session that's a 5-part online training session called Set Your GPS to Increase Profit. The first one is the introduction to financial management, some of the stuff we just already looked at here. We take a look at how to customize your chart of accounts, stuff we couldn't get into in this call. But you want your chart of accounts to be set up so that it gives you the information you want. Too little is not good, too much is not good. We believe that there's a set that you should see, and we cover that. In that session, I do an introduction to key performance indicators, similar to what we just looked at. I provide the income statement analysis tool. The action plan for you to do after you take that class is to complete your own income statement analysis tool, and then you complete it and you send it to me for me to review. So it's not just training, it's coaching as well. Part 2 is some other software that we can't get into in a short session like this, but it's software called Profit Builder, and we show you how to go through. It's about 16 pages long. It's not a spreadsheet, it's actual software. I introduce you to that, I send it to you, introduce you to 24 key performance indicators, and then the action plan after that, it's all about implementation. what did you do with what you knew? And the action plan is to complete your own build software, and then of course you send those results. The third is a little bit more detailed. It's the balance sheet. A lot of people don't track their balance sheet, and you can get into trouble if you don't take a look at the big picture, an introduction to cash flow, and then the whole 24 KPIs. Where are you? Where should you be in these 24 areas? Part number 4, slides out of order here, but 4 is to go through the training on the composite that I just provided for you, and something that I just added this week. Instead of doing 5, which is a session on training, what I ask you to do is to complete your own detailed composite like I just showed you. You submit that to Kevin and I as your coaches, and we provide that to you. Just pricing very quickly. I don't want to make this a big long commercial. The pricing for that 5 session includes the Profit Builder software, the income statement analysis tool, what you're getting today anyway, both parts matrix, which I'm giving to you anyway today, all of the spreadsheets, including the composite that I just showed you, the workbook with all the KPI calculations. What it does is it shows you manually how to do each of the calculations. Remember in school when you were in math, I didn't like math personally, and you're in school and you got the right answer, but you only got half marks because you didn't show your work. And I hated that. What do you mean I didn't show the work? I don't understand this, but I do have the right answer. They were onto something with showing the work. And I found in some of the composites that we use, people would give us data, we'd put it into our fancy spreadsheets and give it back to them, and they go, but how is that calculated? How is that calculated? So what we do is I teach you how to do each calculation manually. Kevin, you saw me do that in Ottawa. Here is where here's the financials. You look at the financials, calculate where they're at, where they should be as the benchmarks that we provide, and then of course we provide the training on how to get there. It includes a whole bunch of additional spreadsheets that we can't get into all of them right now. The workbook with all the KPI calculations in it, the detailed composite, at least 1 hour of web-based coaching with myself and 2 hours of web-based coaching with Kevin King. That entire package, $450 Canadian. I'm going to send you the information on that. I don't need to talk about that further. The last thing that was very clear with Bob and on that trip that we made to Atlanta when he was 55 that day, we had a great discussion about implementation. And he'd been in the industry a long time, and he said, Kelly, some people do well, some people don't. Some people will come to a training class, and we used to do a 2-day class, a month later a 2-day class, a month later a 2-day class, and a month later a 2-day class. And I know, and so did he, that some people would come to the class, sit there, take notes like crazy, go back to the shop, put the binder on the shelf, get busy for the whole month, and they go, oh, the next class is coming up, it's tomorrow. Grab the binder off the shelf, head to the class, get new information to put into that binder, take a whole bunch of notes. I mean, how many people like myself have bought books that you've never read, or you buy that, that course on how to make huge amounts of money in real estate and never went through it? It's all about implementation. And then there's other people that go back and make the changes. And again, when you're in a management group, what's happening is you are working with other shops, like-minded people that are going to hold you accountable. If Kevin's in a group and Kevin says, I'm going to increase my labor rate, we're going to follow up on that. We're going to have somebody call your shop or, out of the blue and say, what's your labor rate? And if it's not what you said you were going to be, we're going to ask to talk to you and say, what are you doing here? And your people are holding you accountable. Just some of the benefits of the group. I'm going to send you more detailed information. I just want to quickly look at this. We do a bi-weekly owner-manager online meeting. One thing occurred to me recently is people will come to a 5-day class, and honestly, I love the 5-day class. You get to know people well. At the end, honestly, Bob O'Connor and I, by the way, years ago put together a 5-day service advisor class, and both of us, when that final day came, were literally in tears. And yes, Bob O'Connor cried. But it was so neat to see the transformation. But that's a marathon, and marathons are okay. But I think from a training perspective, from a coaching perspective, it's better to do sprints, a series of sprints, than a big long marathon. And I'm not putting down training. Training is really helpful if you go back and implement. But a 5-day class, you go back, if you're not going to take and bite-size it and say, we're going to do this for a while, then we're going to do this for a while, we're going to do this for a while. On the bottom of the action plan, it says it's better to do a couple of things all of the way than 15 things halfway. And too often we do things a bit halfway. So what I decided to put together is an online management group that is far more a series of sprints. And I've spent a lot of time. I'm not a huge phone person. I'm not a big fan of being on the phone. But nowadays I'm spending a lot of time, and I see, like this guy that says, I went to 100 and it worked, and somebody else who said, yes, I finally hired a full-time advisor. For the first time I've done that. It's hugely exciting and invigorating. Secondly is a month coaching with both coaches. So in the group, just to be clear, all the meetings are recorded. You get to listen to them again and again. You are online with all of the other members. Once a month, we do the composite. So we're looking at, instead of your shop, January, February, March, April, May, June, we actually take a look at each shop. So now you see how you're doing in 100 and whatever lines a date, 174, and you see how every other shop is doing. And by the way, including people on this call, everybody on this call, everybody is better at something than everybody else. There's no question. We are all king or queen of something. There are things that you will do better than anybody else. And that's wonderful in a team because you're working together as a team. And I look at Alan's effective labor rate and go, wow, 137, how do you do that? Well, Alan tells me how he does that. And then you've got somebody like Jim who has over 1,000 pre-booked appointments. And having said that, something occurred to me when I was teaching a class one time in Toronto. And I know we talk about routine driving versus, driving that's, stop and go operation, etc. And I was thinking about it one day. I thought, okay, it was when I was in Toronto, Alan, and all of a sudden I go from country boy to a city with 7.9 million people and traffic everywhere, and I'm looking at these cars and all these engines idling, and I thought, cars are in mileage. Heavy-duty trucks are in hours. Planes are in hours on the engine. Boats are in hours. Cars are in mileage. And I wanted to know, what is it like? And I when you're idling, and I searched it, you can Google it. According to Ford, every hour that your engine idles is equal to 25 miles of driving or 40 kilometers. And it's tough hours. It's not like driving down the highway for that hour. You're sitting in traffic and all of a sudden all the stuff happens. And so when people drive a ton and they say, well, they're not ready for an oil change, based on what? Based on mileage, but how many hours do you have in your vehicle? And there's certain vehicles, many vehicles, you can go in and see what the hours are. And one thing, by the way, Kevin, I love about your software is it can track mileage, it can track kilometers, and it can also track hours. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you say, Susan, your car has this many miles, but we looked at it, and since the last time you were here, you put on 272 hours of driving. And so there's a lot of time where you're sitting in traffic. What that equates to be clear, is 40 kilometers for every hour or 25 miles for every hour. For most people is one extra oil change a year. So it's not about just on mileage, 3,000 miles or 5,000 kilometers or more if it's synthetic. We need to focus on the routine driving versus a lot of stop and go operation. And so we need to educate our customers that it's not just about the mileage on that vehicle, it's about hours as well. Anyway, back to this. So bi-monthly meeting, one monthly meeting is we look at everybody's numbers together. We need 100% reporting or a person's not able to be in the group. And by the way, the company that I talked about in Canada that said the composite was too detailed, they said, we won't get people to do it. And I said, look, and you can go online. I don't make stuff up. You go to the WorldPAC website and take a look at the management groups they have. There's one in Seattle, Northwest Group we called it. I started that. It still runs today with a different trainer, different facilitator, and we had 100% reporting. The shop in, the group we had in Denver had 100% reporting. Northern California, which we had some people from Nevada as well, so we called it Calvada, we had 100% reporting. And we believe that with the coaching that we provide, we can get you to a point where you are doing that full composite within the first couple of months. So once a month, we do a management meeting online like we're doing right now, looking at the financial data. We sometimes do those in the evenings. It's up to the group, so you don't have to take time away from the business. And then 1 month is for training. And then once a month, you talk with Kevin and I online. We review your financials one-on-one. Just so you know, it says right there, it says access to Kelly the Coach current online sessions. It says 12. I believe there's actually 17 now. Full sessions of financial management, selling skills, management, etc. The comprehensive financial analysis tool that I just showed you, but there's also the full group composite, so you see every month your shop as it compares to everybody else's. There's a whole bunch more tools and spreadsheets and forms. Once a year, we're going to have a live summit. We're going to have a meeting once a year where we actually get to meet all of the people that are in the group live. I used to do that with WorldPAC, by the way. We had the Denver group, 2 groups in California, the one in Northwest is Seattle. And then once a year, we'd meet at the headquarters for WorldPAC, which is an amazing company, best company I've ever worked with. I just love that company. And we'd have a summit, we called it, where all the people from all the management groups that were able to travel would come to this meeting, and we'd have this live meeting at the headquarters. It was phenomenal to see that happen. And there's the online management group. We have a group online that you share financial data with. That's where your composite comes, but you share information with each other. So Kevin, you just came up with a brand new inspection course, or Alan, or sorry, inspection form. Somebody else came up with a questionnaire for the customers or something. Well, instead of keeping that to yourself, upload it to the group. Everybody gets an email that says Alan uploaded something that was a survey, and Kevin uploaded something. So it's people working together. I've got something you don't have, you've got something I don't have, and that's what makes a teamwork. I mean, if you had a hockey team of just goalies, it wouldn't work. If you had just defensemen, it wouldn't work. You need a goalie, you need centers. Football, same thing. You need offense, you need defense. It takes both. And it's the same thing with a business. We need to work together as a team. And again, the 2 things that I've seen that work the best is being on your numbers and being in a management group. The other thing that I came up with this idea is to involve the advisors. And so I created a composite. Kevin and I did it together. And it's a composite for the advisors. So the advisors get to see their own composite. And once a month, we have the meeting with just the advisors. So you've got, we've got somebody, for example, that's in Atlanta, Canada. We've got somebody in York, Pennsylvania. We've got somebody else that's in Toronto. We've got people spread out across the country in Edmonton, or North America, I should say. And the advisors from your shop get online, they look and see, oh, I'm the king this month of hours per repair order, but Susan is the king, or the queen, I should say, of the most pre-booked appointments. And you see everybody where there's a star performer. And again, one more time, everybody is better at something than everybody else. There's something that you hone in on that you're brilliant with, and that's what makes a good team. Somebody who's a good coach, somebody who's a good hockey player, person forward scoring goals, center scoring goals, defense stopping the goals, and of course the goalie as well. So we have the online training with the service advisors, and lastly is the service advisors online group as well. So advisors have their own group. It's password protected. They go online and they share information with each other. Some of the benefits, there's 2 owner-manager online full group meetings every single month. They're web-based, they're recorded, so you can go back and watch them every time. And then, of course, there's monthly coaching. So what I came up with this idea is calling it Take 90, because they're 90-minute sessions. And so that means each week you take 90 minutes to work on your business, whether that's your own call with one of the coaches, whether that's the meeting with all the other members, or it's your service advisor. Once a week as a sprint, you take 90 minutes away from the business to work on the business. We choose the best time of the day, the best week. What I'm seeing is most owners want an evening. And I make it mandatory. If your service advisor is part of the group, and they should be, then it should be daytime. We're not asking a service advisor to take time on the weekend or the evening to do that coaching session. So the advisor ones are always during the day. We do like to set them up for 2 o'clock in the afternoon, kind of a lull in the day. And just to give you an idea, the online sessions that we already have, one's called Manage Better 2017, Improved Operations for Improved Profits, Improved Communication. The question there is how many problems are caused because of a lack of communication between the customer, the advisor, the tech, the advisors, and the customers. One of my favorite subjects is drastically increase your diagnostic labor sales, 65 ways to increase car count, mastering scheduling, tune up your profits, service advisor selling skills, service advisor essentials. And then there's the 5-part series that I just talked to you about, GPS financial management. And I'm also, we've put together a gem card demo for people who are interested in learning about that software. That's with Mike Kelly, who's brilliant with software, and Kevin King, who's the king of it for sure. He's their lead trainer. And then on how to download those. So when you sign up for a group, you automatically get instant access to about $1,400 worth of online training. You also get the comprehensive financial management tool and the one that's for the group as well. These are all the tools. I don't need to go through that. I've already kind of talked about that. The live summit once a year. and those things I've already talked about. March 21st is when we did that. We don't need to look at that. Just to give you, people want to know what does it cost to become in a group. The initial fee, just so you know, is $730. I went with 30 because it's my 30th anniversary, and that includes your spreadsheets, everything, all the online sessions right away, and then the monthly fee is $330. With that, we're done. We are just sitting right at now 4 o'clock. I didn't want to go beyond 2 hours. I am going to open it up to questions for anybody who has questions. For those of you that are listening to this, you weren't in the live session, you can send me any questions that you have, kelly@kellythecoach.com. With that, I am going to end it because I wanted to keep down to that 2 hours. However, I am opening up to questions. And so in the chat session, some of you are coming on a little bit later, you see the, there's a chat session there, and you can see the chat there, and you can ask any questions that you have. So for those of you that need to get back to your busy lives, thank you for being on this class. Expect an email from me. You are going to receive this recorded session. Just so you know, we are doing it again this evening, and I will make a decision whether I want to send out the afternoon one or the evening one. They run a little bit differently. And so I'll choose what I think is the best of those two and send that to you. And then I'm going to send you all of the spreadsheets that we talked about, with the exception of the composite that's for the group members. So with that, thank you very much. And for those of you that are going to stay on, you can feel free to send any questions that you have. And again, questions afterwards that you have, even if you're on this call live, you can email me at kelly@kellythecoach.com. Anything you want to say, Kevin, in closing?
Yeah, the one other thing, just to clarify, is that on the service advisor composite, we've excluded the owner's salaries, the owner's bottom line numbers. That we've made that composite that we're comparing to help push your advisors with implementation. And the numbers that it's numbers that they really need to know, right? The sold hours per work order. That was the only thing I wanted to clarify, that with the tools that we're going to be using and helping them to push their business and implement right away.
Thank you for mentioning that. I appreciate it. It's essentially the same composite on the top portion. So your advisors are going to see sales, cost of goods sold, hours per repair order, effective labor rate, productivity, efficiency, that stuff. But you're right, the bottom portion of that, the advisor doesn't need to know what you pay each of your employees or yourself, or what you pay for rent. They don't need to see any of that. You can keep that private. So the advisor composite is just the top portion of that. And as an owner, then of course you get the entire composite. So thank you for mentioning that, Kevin.
Yep.
Questions, again, into the chat session down there. You can put in any questions that you have. I see somebody actually just joined us. They're probably testing the connection for tonight.
For tonight, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I tell you, just so you know, I've done this many times, and there typically isn't many questions. I'm just looking back at some of the chats that were happening. I focus on the class, and Kevin's the moderator, so if I don't have the screen on or something's up, he's able to do that. I was looking at some of the people, Springfield, Missouri. Alan Jansen, the editor for the magazine, said he has no hourly door rate with the magazine. Maybe you could tell us what the sales are per page of a magazine. I'm sure he knows those key performance indicators. Just looking back, somebody said $102 an hour. By the way, just for those of you that are online that are from the U.S., and Kevin, you're becoming very Canadianized. Door rate is an expression that I've not heard in the United States except for Kevin. And Alan's on the phone and on the line, and we were sitting in a restaurant one day in where he lives in Hamilton, and it was a Thai restaurant. I remember like it was yesterday, and I would write and I'd put in the article labor rate, and he would edit it and change it to door rate and send it back to me, and I'd say, okay, thank you very much, but it's labor rate. And he said, no, it's door rate. I said, I don't know where that expression came from. It's very Canadian. I don't like the word door rate. And I said, people don't call it a door rate. And Alan, being a bold person and very nice at the same time, I don't mean rude, he just said to this person sitting in the restaurant, so if you were to go to a repair shop and get your car fixed, what would you ask them about how much they charge? He said, well, how much you charge by the hour? And he said, you wouldn't ask what the door rate is? They said, I don't know what a door rate is. And so it's labor rate. Questions? Thank you, Alan. Thanks for the session, Kelly. I have no questions at this time. Smiley face.
Suspend the recording.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody. Again, Kelly at kellythecoach.com. Kevin, thank you for being on the line. Alan, thank you for your time being an editor for a big magazine like that. It's quite a commitment for you. Thank you very much. With that, everybody, thank you very much. And just so you know, we are doing the session again at 8 o'clock Eastern. So if you want to come back on, or you know somebody else that would benefit from it, just send me an email. They can send me an email, and I can add them to the list, the session. I think we only have, trying to do the math here with how many people. Actually, tonight may be completely sold out. Depends on how many people actually come on and compared to watching it on the recorded session. With that, everybody, thank you very much. Expect the email from me. Again, you're getting this recorded session, the spreadsheets that I reviewed today, and some detailed information on the financial management training GPS. With that, everybody, go back, kick butt, and happy implementing.